The issue tonight is one of high profits tied to prescription drugs and questions for doctors about the ethics of the sales practices of the pharmaceutical companies. I'm joined now by Dr. Dale McGee. He is president of the Massachusetts Medical Society. Dr. McGee, welcome back.
Thank you.
Let's go down the list here. Why do doctors need to see drug reps, or detailers as they're called, at all?
I don't think they need to see them at all. They are a source of information. They can bring literature to the doctors that is from the objective peer-reviewed literature. They can provide textbooks on occasion. They can do research or have people from their pharmaceutical companies do research. But doctors don't have to see detailed people at all.
And when you hear about these gifts, and it seems prior to these voluntary limits that were put in place in part by the AMA, the national version of you, the gifts were just ridiculous. I mean, I assume you would agree. But even small gifts, what possible rationale is there for protecting that part of this practice, accepting any gift from a drug manufacturer?
Yeah, I don't think the small gifts need to be protected. They are of minimal value, and that means that they don't mean very much to the doctor or to anyone else in the system. So I don't think they're worth an argument at all.
Big gifts, small. You said small gifts, big gifts. Is there any giving from a pharmaceutical rep, a detailer, any giving? We'll talk about samples in a moment.
Right.
Non-drug things to a doctor from a detailer. Is anything that's defensible or necessary?
The doctor should not be benefiting themselves in a relationship in which they are making decisions for the patient's best interest. And so the answer to that is, if it's a very valuable gift, they shouldn't be taking it.
How does the doctor, I hate to sound naive, but I know this is, how does the doctor possibly rationalize this sort of thing? Getting taken out to dinners or trips, or do they say, I'm learning something that's going to benefit my patients, but they don't have to learn at exotic locales, do they, or do they?
They don't have to, but keep in mind that at this time it's not felt to be ethical at all to be given traveling, lodging, large meals, have tuition paid for you, any of those things. Doctors are supposed to say no to that.
And do some doctors, I know as a practice in days gone by, I don't know if it's still the case, do some doctors ultimately do some of the selling, for lack of a better expression, on behalf of the companies? They go to conferences, they go to forum and say on behalf of the company that we believe this drug or that drug is best for your practice?
If they've done objective research and they have found that a particular drug performs better than the other, then that is not an unreasonable thing to do. But they have to certainly disclose any conflicts of interest that are there. They have to let people know that they may have a conflict and that that relationship exists with a drug company.
They can make a ton of dough, if you'll excuse the expression, from that, can they not? I mean, it can be a very lucrative practice, no?
I don't know individuals that do that. I imagine there are a few individuals that may be doing that, but that does not fall within the realm of what we feel is good practice.
How about the drug sample issue, the free drug sample issue? Does that make sense, or?
It can be used two ways. I think you can get yourself into trouble, just as we heard earlier, by saying, geez, I'll give somebody a few samples here. That'll get them started, and then I'll form, the habit of writing a prescription for this, and that certainly isn't a good way to do it. But there's another approach to using it as well, and that is you do have some indigent patients who may not have a generic alternative or may not have money to buy the generic drug, and you can use it for them.
Well, there's actually Terry Murray, who's the Senate president, actually has a bill pending in front of the legislature which does a couple of things, touches upon what we're doing. One, bans gift giving by the pharmaceutical companies. Two, bans gift receiving by the doctors. And three, on the free sample thing, says, I believe, that if it's exclusively for the benefit of a patient, not very different from what you described at all,
right,
that's the sole circumstance at which it would be permissible. Does the Medical Association, does your organization have a position on this?
Well, we feel that the samples, just as she described in her legislation, is a very reasonable position. We also agree that banning gifts that benefit the physicians personally is a very reasonable position to take, and is the position that we have as well.
So essentially you're on board. I mean, there may be some details, but essentially you support her approach to this thing.
We support those elements of the approach. I think there are elements regarding education that the pharmaceutical companies can participate in that we feel we want to be sure is preserved.
Like what? Give me an example.
Pharmaceutical companies can make unrestricted grants that don't determine who gives the talk, don't determine the subject of the talk, but help to subsidize the talk. Right now, about 30% of the bill for continuing medical education in this country is being paid for by pharmaceutical companies and other biomedical corporations.
But if I'm the patient who hears about that, and I assume you say it with, I know you a little bit, and I know you to be an ethical soul, but if I'm the patient who doesn't know you or doesn't know another leader of the medical profession and says, well, wait a second, even if they're not picking the speaker, if they're picking up the tab for this conference, there is an unspoken, even if it's a subliminal notion, that the doctors there are going to build a relationship with the people who were kind enough to fund the forum. Isn't that at least an appearance of impropriety?
I'm not sure that it has that full appearance to most people, and I would say right now the cost of continuing medical education is so high that if that 30% went away, it would really become prohibitive.
How about the data mining thing? The American Medical Association, from what I understand, is essentially making millions of bucks from providing this data. I have to say, when I read it the first time, I had to read it a second time because I thought, obviously, I'm reading wrong. What possible defense of that can be, other than the fact that they need the dough?
When I found out about it, I opted out. And I can tell you that the Massachusetts Medical Society is supporting legislation that would prohibit the selling of data to outside parties.
Are you the outliers on this, your organization? I mean, do most other state organizations agree with you that this is a bad practice?
I don't know that it's most, but I will tell you that they tried to pass legislation similar to this in New Hampshire, and they are having a great deal of difficulty. It's being opposed fairly successful by the pharmaceutical industry.
And it was declared unconstitutional by court, was it not?
Right.
As a limit on commercial speech. We can discuss that another day. But the one thing I assume everybody can agree upon, except maybe the pharmaceutical companies, these practices do drive up the costs of drugs for the patient, do they not?
They can, but I will tell you that doctors aren't quite as dumb as they may be portrayed. And here in Massachusetts, right now, about 2/3 of the prescriptions being written are for generics. So that's, I think, a good thing, and particularly when you consider the fact that there are some people for whom a generic is not available for their particular illness. When we look at areas such as depression or contraception, the numbers are closer to 75 or 85% are in generics right now. So I think when the doctors have the opportunity and have the options, they are not being steered. They're making good decisions.
Would you, if you were the decision maker, which you are, would you invite someone like Shahram Mahari to your organization's meeting?
To speak to us on how drug detailers work?
Yeah.
He could be a good and exciting presenter.
Before I let you go, Dr. McGee, I have 15 seconds left. If there's one element that's not in the Terry Murray plan, that's not in the thing you described, what's the one additional thing that you think would do the most to protect patients, both their pocketbook and their good health?
I think disclosing how much all the different insurance companies are paying for everything that they pay for right now. Just put it right out there so everybody knows.
Dr. McGee, thank you so much. Talk to you again soon.